Hey guitar fanatics, this video is for all you guitar players out there that are frustrated because you've been playing and practicing and working hard, but you still can't improvise and play solos. And I know there's a lot of you out there. You've put in a lot of time on the guitar, but for some reason things just haven't come together for you. I'm going to show you 4 reasons I pinpointed that students stay stuck and spinning their wheels. And I'm going to tell you how to fix each one of those problems. Make sure to stick around to point number 3 because it might be the ultimate secret to making real progress. Let's get right into it with soloing roadblock number 1. You have no vision for what you want to sound like. I get questions all the time like, what should I be practicing? Or what amp and pedals should I buy? And my answer is always the same. You got to tell me what you want to sound like before I can answer that question. And more often than not, I'm met with a blank stare like I asked the person to solve a physics equation or something. It should be an easy question because most of us take up the guitar because we hear a piece of music that inspires us to want to play. But somewhere along the line, we get lost in the black hole of lessons, and we get buried just learning stuff for the sake of learning, often with no end goal. For instance, if a new student tells me they want to learn to play the blues, are we talking blues like B.B. King, blues like Stevie Ray Vaughan, or blues like Joe Bonamassa? There are massive differences in the styles of those players and massive differences in the things you need to learn to be able to play in the styles of those players. How about a student that says, I want to play rock? Well, are we talking about rock like David Gilmour or rock like Eddie Van Halen? Rock like Mark Knopfler and Dire Straits or rock like Randy Rhoads and Ozzy Osbourne? Not only are the styles of all those players different, the gear that they use is radically different. So you got to have a vision for yourself and it has to be specific. Otherwise, you're just going to bounce from lesson to lesson and tip to tip forever. The reason I put some of my playing at the beginning of the video was because that solo encompasses what I've been working on in my playing for a long time. I'm trying to play with the fire and passion of a Gary Moore, the soulful bends and melody of a David Gilmour, the flash of Eddie Van Halen and Joe Satriani, but nailing the chord changes, injecting a little jazziness into a rock environment like Steve Lukather or Guthrie Govan. And I've taken the time to break down the elements that I admire in the styles of all those players and many more. I hear bits and pieces of my influences in that opening solo, but it still sounds like me. I urge you, sooner than later, take some time to decide what you want your playing to sound like, both from a technical standpoint and a gear standpoint. Then let that vision guide how you practice and what gear you buy. I promise it's an investment of time that will pay huge dividends. Let's move on. Soloing roadblock number 2 is bouncing from tip to tip, but never mastering the fundamentals. This is a big one. I see a lot of students that are what I call dabblers. Here's a perfect case in point. I had a new student tell me they wanted to learn how to play ripping pentatonic cascades like Eric Johnson and Joe Bonamassa, and I said, that's cool, I love those guys. Go up to the 3rd pattern of E minor pentatonic and I'll show you some really cool licks. He kind of fumbled around for a minute and then he had to admit, Charlie, I really don't know all 5 patterns of pentatonic. Well, here's the thing. It's impossible to be expressive and creative if your brain is in panic mode because you can't find the right notes to play. And you're just going to revert back to the same old licks and patterns that you do know over and over. So if you decide that those long pentatonic cascades are something that you want to do in your playing, you have to think about what you need to know to be able to pull that off. First, you have to know all 5 patterns. That's just a given. Secondly, you've got to be able to move fluidly between the patterns up and down the neck. And a really easy way to develop that skill is to start with 2 strings at a time, not all 6. Give this a try. Give this a try. Start by learning to move up and down the neck through the pentatonic patterns, but just on the E and B strings. Let's play in E minor, and in the 3rd and 5th positions, we've got notes from the 2nd and 3rd pattern. In the 7th and 10th position, we've got notes from the 4th and 5th patterns. In the 12th and 15th position, we've got notes from the 1st and 2nd patterns. In the 17th and 19th positions, we've got notes from the 3rd and 4th patterns. Pretty cool. We just covered the entire fretboard. And learning this 2 strings at a time, well, it's not that overwhelming. It's really easy to just grab a fretboard chart and work through something like this. Now there's going to be some work required to go from learning a pattern to turning it into something that sounds really good. And that takes us to soloing roadblock number 3. And this just might be the missing link, the true secret to making real progress with your guitar playing. It's the one thing I've seen time and time again that separates the students that get really good and the ones that don't. Soloing roadblock number 3 is failing to turn the techniques you learn into your own musical ideas. This problem leads to the most common complaint I get from students about their attempts at soloing and improvising. My solos just sound like scale or arpeggio practice. Well, if all you ever do with scales and arpeggios is practice playing them up and down, forward and back, what do you think your solos are going to sound like? From now on, try this with every single technique you learn. When you're learning it, try turning the technique into licks and phrases. For instance, let's take those 2-string pentatonic patterns we were looking at in the last segment. What if when we were memorizing them, we tried this? Play the first pattern, but when I slide into the next pattern, I'm going to play a trill on the high E string before descending, and then I'm going to go back and play the lower note on the high E and descend again. We just turned a scale pattern into a legitimate lick. Now my creative side is flowing. Instead of going back to the note on the high E, let's bend the higher note on the B string up into it and then descend and put some nice vibrato on our finishing note. We just turned a practice exercise into what are now a series of soulful sounding licks. See how that works? How about a technique like triads? Here are 3 inversions of E minor on the G, B, and E strings. Do you think anybody wants to hear you play that in a solo? But what if we get crazy and we add a note or two and some tasty bends to those 3 inversions? We could get something like this. I'm willing to bet if you're struggling making progress with your solos, this is why. You learn the pattern of a concept or a technique, but you never do anything to turn it into music and make it your own. And one of the reasons for that is our next roadblock. Soloing roadblock number 4 is not understanding enough theory. Now don't worry, I'm not going to turn this into a huge theory lecture. But do you understand how much easier it would be to turn triads into licks like we did in the last segment if you had some understanding of intervals and what they sound like? Take the E minor triad at the 7th position on the G, B, and E strings. Now I hope you know that triads are made up of the root, the 3rd, and the 5th interval. But again, nobody wants to hear you just play this in a solo. But what if we do something like this? Play the root, 3rd, and 5th, but then the 6th and 5th, the 3rd, 4th, 2nd, and 3rd again, then the 7th, and finish on the root. Well, now we've got a melody. Play that same melody, but add some bends, slides, and vibratos. We can make it sound like this. Or here's a simple idea that sounds incredible, and it's reminiscent of the types of phrases David Gilmour and Steve Lukather have made careers out of. We're going to take our 3 triad inversions, ascend through them, but when we get to the top note, we're going to play the next note in the scale, bend it up into the note that follows that one. So this shape at the 7th position with the root 3rd and 5th, we're going to also play the 6th, bend it up to the 7th, and then play our way back down. Go up to the 12th position. We've got the 3rd, the 5th, and the root. We're going to also play the 2nd, bend it into the 3rd, and then descend back down. Lastly, we've got a shape here with the 5th, the root, and the 3rd. We're also going to play the 4th, bend it up into the 5th, and descend back down. Those are great emotional sounding licks that we created out of what can be a very dry technique. And you can do the same thing with every triad shape you learn, every 7th arpeggio shape you learn, every scale pattern you learn. It's limitless. Now, if you've got a good ear, you can kind of hunt and peck your way through this stuff. Wow, but just knowing a little bit about intervals makes it so much easier. When people come back at me and they want to argue, yeah, well, Jimi Hendrix and the Beatles didn't know any music theory. But here's the thing. You're not Jimi Hendrix or Paul McCartney. And Hendrix and the Beatles didn't learn music theory in a classroom, but they understood how music works and fits together. I'll leave you with this. There's a great video you can find on YouTube where B.B. King gives a masterclass on playing the blues. And he gets into jazz blues, different complex chords, diminished licks, and Django Reinhardt licks. B.B.'s playing some pretty complex runs through the chord changes and talking about his note choices. At one point, the interviewer stops him and says, "Whoa, I thought you didn't know music theory." And B.B. kind of laughs and goes, "Well, I might know a little bit more than I've let on." People want to hold on to this romantic notion that unschooled players don't know anything because those people are lazy. They don't want to accept that they have to put in work to get better. B.B. King didn't learn music in a classroom, but he absorbed a lot of music and he knew how to use what he absorbed. He was able to put it to work, and that took a lot of thought. It took a lot of practice. And that's right in line with the points I've been making in this video. You have to develop a vision for what you want to sound like. Listen to players that excite you, learn from what they do, and make it your own. You have to master certain fundamental techniques so you can make your way around the fretboard without fumbling around and getting lost. Once you learn a technique, you've got to make music with it. Nobody wants to hear you run scales. But if you can take certain important notes from a scale and turn them into really great licks, well, now you got something. And lastly, knowing enough theory to know what sounds good and what doesn't. In other words, how music works. It just makes everything easier, and it's going to save you immense amounts of time in the long run. So I hope this lesson helps you. Get busy. Don't half-ass things. Develop your skills and have fun with that guitar. I'll see you with another lesson next week. Bye.